At 6:12 a.m., Michael Harper woke up screaming inside the Hawthorne Hotel, a long abandoned building off Highway 26 deep in the Oregon Cascades. His phone had no signal, no location, and the sunlight outside didn't match the time. His right eye burned, and dark, finger-shaped bruises marked his left hand. The door was still locked from the inside. Michael Harper was 34, a man whose life revolved around routines and precision. He lived in Portland, Oregon with his wife, Jessica, and their two children, Ellie, 6, and Sam, 9. Michael worked as an electrical inspector for commercial and industrial buildings, a career that required patience, attention to detail, and a deep respect for rules. He liked systems he could understand, circuits he could trace, and buildings that behaved predictably. People, by contrast, were messier, but he loved his family with quiet devotion and structured consistency. It was early September, the kind of cool, crisp mornings that promised clarity and comfort. Michael had spent weeks planning a weekend hike in the Cascade Mountains. The trip had been a joint effort, maps spread across the kitchen table, lists of supplies meticulously checked, debates over which trails offered the best balance of challenge and scenery. Jessica had wanted a weekend for the family, but coordinating work schedules, school, and childcare had been difficult. By mid-September, the compromise had been reached. The children would stay with Michael's parents in Beaverton, and the couple would take 2 days to hike alone. On the morning of the planned departure, Michael woke early, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards under settling wood. He moved through the house methodically, boots by the door, backpacks by the car, gear spread neatly across the counter. He checked the list one last time. Sleeping bag, first aid kit, flashlight, GPS, map, extra batteries, water bottles, trail snacks, spare clothing. Every item was accounted for. Everything was in order. Jessica moved through the house in her usual multitasking rhythm, preparing breakfast for the kids while also checking emails and messages on her phone. "We'll leave by 10, she said, tossing Michael a small insulated bag with sandwiches, granola bars, and fruit she had prepared the night before. He smiled, kissed her cheek, and loaded the last items into the trunk. Then her phone rang. Michael noticed immediately. The ringtone was sharp, urgent. She stepped into the hallway to take the call. He could hear the low murmur of her voice, the polite but firm tones as she responded to her supervisor. Michael knew in an instant that their weekend would change. When Jessica returned, her expression was apologetic. "They need me in the office," she said. "Some client emergency? I can't get out of it." Michael's stomach sank slightly, but he had expected unpredictability in life, even in well-planned routines. He glanced at the clock, then at the packed car. The kids were already with his parents. Everything else was in his control. Going alone was, he told himself, the logical choice. Jessica nodded, a faint smile crossing her features despite the disruption. "You'll be fine," she said. "Just take pictures, text me if anything changes. Be careful." She kissed him on the forehead. Michael returned the gesture, reassured by her calm, and climbed into the driver's seat. The drive toward government camp was quiet. Early morning fog drifted low across the city streets, dissolving into the dense forest as he left Portland behind. Michael appreciated mornings like this. A road nearly empty, a world slowly waking, the sky pale with sunlight filtered through clouds. His mind wandered, as it always did on drives. The weekend plan, the kids, Jessica's work, and the hike itself. The route was clear. Highway 26 east, past Sandy, up through the forested hills, following the winding road toward the trailhead. Arriving at the trailhead, he paused briefly, checking the parking area, which was empty save for a few fallen leaves scattered by a light breeze. The forest smelled damp, earthy, and alive, the scent of pine and wet soil filling the cool morning air. Michael tightened his boots, adjusted his backpack straps, and took a final glance at his map and GPS. The route was clear, predictable, and logical. Everything about this morning, from the drive to the loaded gear, had been grounded in preparation and routine. Michael felt calm, steady, and ready. There was no rush, no last-minute panic, no dramatic tension. Just the quiet knowledge that he had planned carefully, had prepared every necessary item, and had accounted for contingencies. He was leaving his home, his children in safe hands, for a few days of solitude on the trail. It was simple, ordinary, and sensible. He took a slow breath, enjoying the crisp forest air, and stepped onto the dirt path, the sounds of Portland fading behind him. Birds called from the treetops, a small creek gurgled nearby, and the trail extended steadily into the mountains. Each step was deliberate, measured, and full of the quiet satisfaction of a man whose life, at least for this weekend, was entirely within his control. Even as he walked, Michael did not imagine that the carefully constructed order of his life would soon be disrupted. The trail, the forest, and the mountains were supposed to follow logic, obeying predictable rhythms of light, sound, and distance. And for now, they did. But by nightfall, that sense of certainty would begin to erode, in ways he could not yet anticipate. For Michael Harper, this hike was not supposed to be extraordinary. It was supposed to be routine, safe, predictable. And in that calm, grounded expectation, the stage was set for a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about control, reality, and the spaces we trust. Michael had left the trailhead just after 10 a.m., his backpack snug against his shoulders and his boots crunching lightly over the packed dirt. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of damp earth and pine. He moved at a steady pace, listening to the gentle murmur of a nearby creek, the occasional bird call, the soft scrape of branches against the forest floor. His mind cataloged the environment as he walked, the way he always did. The spacing of trees, the rise and fall of the trail, the texture of the ground beneath his boots. The first mile passed without incident. The path followed the map precisely, winding around ridges and across small streams, marked by familiar blazes on tree trunks. Michael stopped occasionally to sip water, to check the map against the GPS, and to photograph notable rock formations and twisted trees. It was routine, predictable, satisfying. By late morning, however, subtle discrepancies began to emerge. A trail marker he had passed in previous hikes appeared to be missing, replaced by a faint scrape on a nearby tree. Another fork in the trail seemed unfamiliar, though logic told him it should not exist. He paused, consulting the GPS. The signal flickered oddly, the blue dot jumping slightly off the path before settling again. Michael frowned, but the map still aligned with the main route. Probably a loose signal, he muttered to himself. The forest remained quiet, almost unnaturally so. The usual chorus of insects and small animals was minimal, and even the wind seemed subdued. Michael noted it silently, cataloging this minor anomaly without alarm. He pressed onward, confident in his preparation and equipment. By early afternoon, the trail had grown steeper, and shadows stretched longer under the tall firs and hemlocks. Michael paused at a rocky outcrop to rest, pulling out a sandwich and checking his watch. The GPS indicated the correct location, yet a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck. He glanced around. The forest seemed the same, yet subtly shifted. Fallen logs appeared in places he didn't remember, roots jutted up at different angles, and the path occasionally split where it had never split before. He shook his head and reminded himself he had planned for this. Trails evolved slightly. Natural changes occurred. As he continued, the sunlight began fading faster than expected. By 3:30, the shadows had grown long and diffuse, and a low fog began to drift through the trees. Michael checked his phone. It had been fully charged that morning, Yet the battery level dropped unusually fast, even though he hadn't used it except for GPS checks. A flicker of concern passed through him, but he suppressed it. The weather forecast had predicted fog and cloud cover, so this was plausible. A few more miles brought him to a narrow ridge. The trail narrowed further, bordered by steep drop-offs and dense underbrush. The map indicated a switchback ahead, but the trail seemed to stretch longer than it should. Every landmark he recognized, the twisted pine at the creek, the moss-covered boulder, the fallen log, appeared slightly displaced. Michael adjusted his pace and recalculated, but everything he tried still led him to subtle inconsistencies. By late afternoon, light was waning rapidly. Michael glanced up. The sun had dipped behind the peaks, casting long shadows that shifted with the rising fog. The temperature dropped noticeably, cool enough to make him pull his jacket tighter. He checked the map and GPS again. The devices were still functional, yet the trail was becoming harder to follow. Footprints in the dirt seemed too large to belong to wildlife, heading off the main path and disappearing into the forest. Michael stopped, hands on his hips, and assessed his situation. He was prepared. Warm clothing, flashlight, extra batteries, water, and food. He reminded himself that nightfall in the Cascades was predictable, that he had anticipated delays, that he had planned for contingencies. Panic was unnecessary. He was methodical, logical, safe. As darkness fell, the trail became increasingly difficult to discern. The forest closed in around him, dense trunks and underbrush forming nearly impenetrable walls. Michael's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the gloom, illuminating roots, rocks, and the occasional animal tracks. The GPS still worked but seemed hesitant, as if signaling a slightly different position every few minutes. Michael noted the inconsistencies, cataloged them silently, and pressed onward. Around 7 p.m., the fog thickened, and the trail markings became hard to see. The temperature had dropped, and a biting wind made the forest feel larger, emptier, more isolated than it had at dawn. Michael paused and considered his options. Continuing blindly through the dark forest would be risky, but he could also find a sheltered area and camp until morning. Rationality dictated the latter choice. He scanned the surrounding trees, looking for a dry, elevated spot. Fallen logs formed natural barriers, and the terrain sloped gently toward a small clearing. Michael carefully cleared debris, laid down a ground sheet, and prepared to sleep sitting up rather than lying flat, ensuring he could move quickly if needed. He checked his gear again: flashlight, extra batteries, water, and food within reach. All logical, all prepared. Even as he settled down, Michael remained alert. Every crackle of twigs, every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird or small animal registered in his mind. He cataloged each sound, each movement, every shifting shadow. There was no fear, only observation. Yet, as darkness fully enveloped the forest, subtle oddities began. A branch moved without wind. A shadow seemed too deliberate. A faint metallic scrape echoed distantly, but it could have been debris, an animal, or a trick of the fog. Michael noted the anomalies in his mind, rationalized them as natural, and continued documenting mentally, cataloging every detail. He forced himself to focus on essentials: warmth, hydration, orientation. By 9 p.m., he closed his eyes for brief rests, flashlight illuminating only the immediate area around him. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the fog and shadows. Every noise felt delayed, echoes shifting unnaturally through the mist. Michael monitored, listened, cataloged, but remained composed. Sleep, when it came, was shallow, punctuated by small twigs snapping, distant animal calls, and his own mental calculations of routes, distances, and safety. As the night pressed on, he awoke repeatedly, each time reassessing the trail and the fog, the darkness and the trees. By midnight, Michael realized the forest was larger, denser, more disorienting than it should have been, yet he reminded himself of preparation, skill, and logic. He would continue in the morning. For now, shelter, observation, patience, calm, grounded. And then, through the fog and darkness, beyond the shadows of the trees and across the clearing, he saw it. A silhouette of a building that had no right to exist there. A structure looming above the forest floor, with a sagging sign he could barely make out, Hawthorne Hotel. The edges of the windows reflected moonlight. The four-story building stood solid and undeniable, though nothing on the maps, GPS, or trail guides should have placed it there. Michael paused, chest tightening subtly, breath steady, rationality intact. He stepped off the trail toward the hotel cautiously, flashlight and backpack ready, considering the logical reasons for taking shelter versus the unknown. The forest behind him seemed to grow quieter. The fog shifted unnaturally. Something about the building felt deliberate, intentional, as if it had been waiting. And for the first time that night, Michael felt the weekend, carefully planned and orderly, begin to unravel. Michael walked cautiously through the fog-thickened clearing, every step deliberate on the soft, damp forest floor. The trail had vanished behind him, swallowed by shadows and mist, leaving only the soft crunch of his boot. Ahead, the building loomed, impossibly real, and yet wholly out of place. The Hawthorne Hotel, as the faded, paint-chipped sign declared, sat on a small rise, surrounded by gnarled trees that leaned as if bowing to its presence. It was 4 stories tall, its exterior a mix of cracked white stucco and warped wood paneling. Dark, shuttered windows glimmered faintly in the moonlight, the glass uneven and dirty. A rusting wrought iron balcony jutted from the second floor in the wind. The roof sagged in the center, the ridgeline uneven, yet somehow the building retained an imposing, deliberate symmetry. The parking area was littered with debris, broken signs, a few rusted metal chairs, and a single abandoned sedan, its tires flattened, paint flaking. A shallow puddle reflected the dim moonlight, distorting the image of the Hawthorne like a warped photograph. The silence was nearly complete, except for the occasional whisper of wind through broken eaves or the distant call of an owl. Michael paused at the edge of the lot, hands on his hips, studying the building. The forest behind him seemed oddly muted, shadows clinging closer to the ground. He pulled out his phone to check GPS, but the device spun in circles, unable to locate a signal. Maps showed nothing but trees and mountains. Logical explanations ran through his mind. Old, unregistered property, a private estate tucked off grid, a forgotten forest retreat. None fully satisfied him, but none demanded immediate alarm either. For several long minutes, Michael stood there, debating. Entering the hotel meant leaving the forest shelter, risking the unknown, yet staying in the open as night deepened posed its own dangers. The building seemed inviting in a strange way, offering the possibility of warmth, shelter, and safety from the fog. Rationality nudged him forward. He adjusted his backpack, gripping the straps tightly, and approached the hotel entrance. The front doors were double, heavy oak, with metal handles blackened by time. The wood was warped but intact. Faded gold letters above one panel spelled out "Reception," etched into the wood. Michael pushed the right-hand door gently. It resisted at first, then swung open with a low groan, echoing unnaturally in the foggy silence. A thin layer of dust puffed into the air, catching the flashlight beam in motes that floated lazily before settling again. Inside, the lobby stretched wide, though low ceilings gave a sense of compressed space. A once grand chandelier hung crookedly above, crystal prisms dull with age and dirt. The reception desk was long, made of dark wood, scuffed and nicked, with a thin layer of dust covering the countertop. Behind it, a wall of pigeonholes, formerly for room keys or messages, sat empty. Papers, yellowed with age, littered the floor near the desk. Handwritten invoices, hotel records, some dating back decades. The air smelled of damp wood, mildew, and faintly sweet decay, the kind that clung to furniture and fabric over years of neglect. Michael stepped carefully, his boots creaking on the warped wooden floorboards. His flashlight beam danced across peeling wallpaper, water-stained carpets, and heavy curtains that blocked moonlight from the tall windows. To the left, a wide hallway led deeper into the hotel. Doors lined each side, evenly spaced, some slightly ajar, some fully closed. The woodwork was old but solid. The brass handles glinted faintly under the flashlight's glare. A staircase rose to the second floor, carpet threadbare, banister coated in a thin layer of dust, each step groaning in protest when he tested it. Michael explored slowly, cataloging details as he went. Logic dictated a simple plan: find a room, secure it, and rest. His pace was measured, methodical, flashlight sweeping across each surface. One room in particular drew his attention. The door bore a brass number plate, 212, intact, polished enough to suggest recent contact, odd for a hotel that had supposedly been abandoned for decades. Pushing the door open, he stepped inside. The room was small, perhaps 12 by 12 feet. A single bed, neatly made though dust-covered, sat against the far wall. The sheets were yellowed but surprisingly intact, pillows flattened but positioned as if someone had just left. A dresser and nightstand occupied the opposite wall. A thin layer of dust coated them, except for a small section on the dresser where fingerprints had erased it. The carpet was threadbare, stained, but soft underfoot. A small lamp on the nightstand had a bulb intact, though it remained untested. Michael set down his pack, took inventory of the supplies he had brought, and moved to secure the door. The lock clicked easily, and he checked the deadbolt twice. Everything was operational. He placed his flashlight and GPS on the nightstand, water bottle within reach. A small window overlooked the forest clearing outside, moonlight casting long shadows across the room. Even as he settled, a subtle wrongness began to register. The shadows were too still, the room too quiet, the silence unnaturally complete. The faintest creak of the floor beneath him echoed in a way that suggested something deliberate. Michael cataloged the oddity mentally, reminding himself: logic, preparation, and attention to detail. He noted the faint trace of a musty, organic odor lingering near the door, the wallpaper peeling in geometric patterns, the curtains swaying without a draft. Hours passed. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, reviewing the maps on his phone and photographs of the trail he had taken. Everything outside was muted by fog, the forest nothing more than shadows beyond the window. Sleep, when it came, was cautious, shallow, attentive. His body was alert even as he drifted, ears straining for unusual sounds, mind cataloging the room and its anomalies. By the time he finally allowed himself to lean back and close his eyes, the hotel had fully established its presence. It was no longer just a building, a shelter. It was a space that responded, observed, and contained him. Every creak, every shadow, every subtle movement in the corner of his vision felt purposeful. Michael did not know it yet, but the Hawthorne Hotel had begun its work, claiming the night, cataloging its new guest, and quietly bending reality to the shape of his expectations and his fears. Michael sat on the edge of the bed in room 212, listening. The walls were unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. His flashlight cast long, thin shadows across the floor, walls, and ceiling, exaggerating every corner, every detail of peeling wallpaper and warped wood. The room smelled faintly of damp fabric, old dust, and something else he couldn't identify, a coppery tang, subtle and elusive. He placed his backpack carefully by the dresser, set his phone and flashlight on the nightstand, and unrolled a small notebook. Logic dictated cataloging every observation: the condition of the room, the furniture, the layout, the lighting. Even as he wrote, he traced the edges of the bed and the windowsill with his fingers, checking for damage, cracks, or anything that might pose a risk. Everything seemed solid, tangible, and predictable. Curiosity, however, pushed him to explore further. Michael rose and moved into the hall, flashlight sweeping over the peeling wallpaper and closed doors. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and varnish, a combination that was slightly nauseating after several minutes. Each door he passed bore brass number plates, some tarnished, some surprisingly polished. The carpet runner along the hall was threadbare, with muted floral patterns fading into brown. He mapped the hallway in his mind, counting doors, noting patterns, recalling landmarks in the woodwork and the slightly warped floorboards. A narrow staircase curved to the left at the far end of the corridor, leading to the second floor. Michael ascended slowly, each step groaning under his weight, the banister coated in a thin layer of dust that came away on his fingers. The second floor mirrored the first, doors aligned evenly, identical in appearance to those below. Michael inspected several rooms, gently pushing each door. Most were empty, furniture long gone or collapsed in dusty piles, the carpets moth-eaten and stained. Room 212, by contrast, seemed intentionally maintained, as if someone, or something, had preserved it. He paused, noting the discrepancy, but logic offered explanations. Perhaps the hotel had selective cleaning before abandonment, or maybe materials had simply survived differently. A faint breeze stirred the curtains in one room, though all windows were closed. Michael bent to check for a draft, finding none. He cataloged the anomaly, noting it as an oddity rather than a threat. Beyond the windows, the forest stretched, fog obscuring the clearing he had used to enter. The moonlight reflected off the broken balcony and warped roof, and the shadows of the trees appeared closer than they should have. Michael sat on the edge of the bed in room 212, listening. The walls were unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. His flashlight cast long, thin shadows across the floor, walls, and ceiling, exaggerating every corner, every detail of peeling wallpaper and warped wood. The room smelled faintly of damp fabric, old dust, and something else he couldn't identify, a coppery tang, subtle and elusive. He placed his backpack carefully by the dresser, set his phone and flashlight on the nightstand, and unrolled a small notebook. Logic dictated cataloging every observation: the condition of the room, the furniture, the layout, the lighting. Even as he wrote, he traced the edges of the bed and the windowsill with his fingers, checking for damage, cracks, or anything that might pose a risk. Everything seemed solid, tangible, and predictable. Curiosity, however, pushed him to explore further. Michael rose and moved into the hall, flashlight sweeping over the peeling wallpaper and closed doors. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and varnish, a combination that was slightly nauseating after several minutes. Each door he passed bore brass number plates, some tarnished, some surprisingly polished. The carpet runner along the hall was threadbare, with muted floral patterns fading into brown. He mapped the hallway in his mind, counting doors, noting patterns, recalling landmarks in the woodwork and the slightly warped floorboards. A narrow staircase curved to the left at the far end of the corridor, leading to the second floor. Michael ascended slowly, each step groaning under his weight, the banister coated in a thin layer of dust that came away on his fingers. The second floor mirrored the first, doors aligned evenly, identical in appearance to those below. Michael inspected several rooms, gently pushing each door. Most were empty, furniture long gone or collapsed in dusty piles, the carpets moth-eaten and stained. Room 212, by contrast, seemed intentionally maintained, as if someone, or something, had preserved it. He paused, noting the discrepancy, but logic offered explanations. Perhaps the hotel had selective cleaning before abandonment, or maybe materials had simply survived differently. A faint breeze stirred the curtains in one room, though all windows were closed. Michael bent to check for a draft, finding none. He cataloged the anomaly, noting it as an oddity rather than a threat. Beyond the windows, the forest stretched, fog obscuring the clearing he had used to enter. The moonlight reflected off the broken balcony and warped roof, and the shadows of the trees appeared closer than they should have. As midnight approached, Michael attempted to sleep. He laid on the bed, flashlight turned down, backpack under the pillow for easy access. The silence was near total, except for a faint hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, soft but constant. He cataloged the sound, noting its frequency, volume, and rhythm. There was no panic, only observation. Several minutes into rest, he noticed something else. The shadows along the far wall appeared to shift independently of his movements. When he focused on them directly, they froze, only to subtly change again when his attention wandered. He sat upright, flashlight sweeping slowly, finding nothing concrete. The room remained empty, yet the feeling persisted. He was being observed. Michael shifted his attention to the furniture. The small lamp on the nightstand, which had been off, now cast a faint glow. He hadn't touched it. The shadows it produced seemed sharper, darker, almost deliberate. The dresser reflected a distorted version of the room, familiar yet subtly off. Every edge, every corner, every object appeared fractionally misaligned. By 2 a.m., the hotel had fully imposed itself. The subtle wrongness that had begun hours earlier had deepened. Floorboards groaned under no weight, doors creaked as though opening themselves, and the faint scent of decay mixed with something faintly metallic lingered in the corners. Michael remained alert, cataloging, noting, testing the logic of each anomaly. Sleep came in brief spurts, shallow and interrupted. Each time he awoke, the room seemed marginally different. The angle of the bed, the alignment of the dresser, even the position of the shadows. Michael did not panic. He noted every change, recording the oddities in his mind and on his phone when possible. Observation was his anchor. By morning, the hotel had established a subtle control over time and perception. The boundaries of the room felt slightly smaller, the walls slightly closer. Michael was aware that something about the Hawthorne Hotel was deliberate, responsive, patient. For now, it had not harmed him directly, but it had begun its silent influence, testing, cataloging, and guiding him toward experiences he could not yet predict. Michael awoke to a thin line of light creeping under the door of room 212. At first, he assumed it was the early morning sun, yet the angle was wrong. The light slanted across the room from the side where no window existed. He blinked, slowly lifting his head from the bed, the softness of the sheets giving way to a faint stiffness beneath him. A dull ache pressed behind his right eye, and when he reached up to rub it, he recoiled. His fingers traced a dark, slightly swollen mark across his eyelid. There was no blood, no tear in the skin, just a faint bruise in a crescent shape, as if something had bitten or pressed firmly against him. The sensation of pain deepened when he moved, extending into the temple. Michael froze, heart rate rising slightly, mind racing through the previous night. He remembered nothing unusual, no struggle, no impact, no reason for this. Glancing down at his hands, he noticed more. Irregular dark impressions on his right forearm, vaguely circular, resembling the pressure of fingers or teeth. The marks were too precise to be accidental, and too organized to be random. He flexed his fingers, gently pressing on the flesh. No bleeding, no skin breakage. The sensation was painful, a deep, dull ache that seemed to resonate through the underlying muscles. Michael shivered, a creeping awareness settling in. Something had interacted with him while he slept, something deliberate. He reached for his phone to record photos of the marks. The device displayed the correct time, yet his watch, resting on the nightstand, was nearly an hour ahead. Confusion gnawed at him, yet he cataloged every detail methodically. Photographs of his hand and eye, notes about the appearance and orientation of the marks, and a mental sketch of room 212's current state. He tested the door, opening it slightly to inspect the hallway. Everything appeared unchanged, yet a faint scent lingered, metallic, like rusted iron mixed with something organic, perhaps the same coppery tang he had noticed the night before. The reflection in the small bathroom mirror startled him further. His movement seemed fractionally delayed. His hands rose, and only after a heartbeat did the reflection follow. The bruises were clearly visible now, darker than they had appeared in the dim room. Shadows under his eyes had deepened, though he had not slept enough to explain the lines. He checked the floor, finding faint dust disturbances near the door and along the edges of the dresser, patterns he did not remember making. Michael's thoughts returned to the hallway. The hotel, silent yet aware, seemed to have rearranged itself subtly overnight. The angle of the bed was slightly rotated, the dresser shifted a few inches closer to the wall, and the shadow cast by the lamp now stretched unnaturally across the room, sharper and darker than before. Nothing was overtly violent or threatening, yet the space felt alive, deliberate, attentive. He sat on the edge of the bed, cataloging each anomaly. The marks on his body, the subtle changes in the room, the delayed reflection, they formed a pattern. The hotel was not just a shelter, it had observed him, interacted with him, and left evidence of its presence in ways he could see, touch, and photograph. Michael felt a rising urgency, but not outright panic. He reminded himself, observation first, judgment later. Curious, he explored the room systematically. Every drawer, every corner, every surface showed no obvious disturbance beyond what he had already noted. He tested the windows. They remained shut. He checked the door lock, deadbolt secure. Every item he had brought remained in place. Yet the evidence of overnight activity was undeniable. Marks on his body, subtle shifts in furniture, dust patterns altered, shadows sharper, light appearing where it should not. Michael's mind cataloged potential explanations: sleepwalking, hallucinations, fatigue-induced errors, or some mechanical anomaly in the hotel itself. None fully satisfied the data. He could not account for the precise placement of the bruises or the subtle adjustments of objects he had not moved. The hotel had left a message, one written not in words, but in physical evidence, in minor but undeniable changes to the environment. Despite the rising tension, he documented everything: photographs of his eye and hand, notes on room alterations, sketches of the hallway from memory, recordings of the faint hum that seemed to emanate from the walls, all captured. He checked the light once more. Shadows shifted again, briefly aligning with a doorway that had been empty when he first looked. The scent in the room grew stronger, more metallic, pressing subtly against his awareness. Standing, he prepared his backpack. Water, snacks, flashlight, and phone secured. He took a final inventory of the room. Everything in place, yet irrevocably altered. The bruises on his body throbbed faintly, a tactile memory of the hotel's silent interaction. His rational mind cataloged the evidence, yet an undeniable instinct pressed him to leave immediately. He paused at the door, hand on the handle. Outside, the hallway stretched, familiar yet subtly different. The shadows lengthened and contracted independently of the sun. Floorboards creaked as if anticipating his steps. Michael exhaled slowly, grounding himself. Observation, logic, caution. He would leave, and the hotel would not resist, at least, not in a way he could perceive yet. As he stepped into the corridor, a faint metallic scent lingered, and he noted it for his records. Every footstep echoed, yet beneath it, the subtle hum continued, a reminder of the night's interaction. The marks on his eye and hand pulsed faintly with each movement, a warning and a record. Michael moved forward deliberately, leaving room 212 behind, aware that the hotel's influence had only begun. By the time he reached the staircase leading down, he understood fully. The Hawthorne Hotel observed, interacted, and remembered. He could leave physically, but the evidence it had left on him, bruises, shadows, shifted furniture, would ensure he would carry its presence wherever he went. Michael's boots clicked softly on the creaking floorboards as he descended the staircase. Every shadow seemed to follow him, stretching unnaturally, but he kept moving. The marks on his hand and eye pulsed faintly, a tactile reminder of the hotel's silent interaction. He felt a tight pressure in his chest, not panic exactly, but urgency. Logic dictated he leave immediately, but the building subtly resisted. Hallways seemed longer, corners slightly shifted, doors closer than memory suggested. Reaching the first-floor hallway, Michael paused, listening. The faint hum from the walls lingered, nearly imperceptible yet constant. He tested the doorknob leading to the parking area, and it turned smoothly. The outside smelled sharply of pine, damp earth, and early morning fog. He stepped out, expecting relief, but the world beyond the hotel seemed distorted, almost unreal. The trees looked taller, the shadows longer. The fog clung unnaturally to the ground, muffling sound. He jogged to the clearing where he had parked, flashlight off, scanning for movement. Nothing approached, yet every step felt watched. His mind cataloged details: tire tracks in the mud leading nowhere, subtle indentations in the gravel that weren't his, and the faint metallic scent lingering in the air. The hotel sat behind him, silent and imposing, its windows dark, almost reflective, but one upper-floor window caught a fleeting glint, a suggestion of awareness, like the hotel had noticed him leaving. The drive back to the nearest town took longer than expected. Roads he remembered as familiar twisted slightly, bends stretching longer than memory allowed. GPS signals flickered intermittently, then recalibrated to show he was heading north when he knew he had gone east. He dismissed the errors, attributing them to storm clouds or poor reception, but the uneasy feeling persisted. When he reached the first gas station, Michael parked and leaned back, exhales shakily. His reflection in the car window startled him. Dark bruises on his hand, and the eyelid had deepened, slightly swollen, as if reminding him they were real. The marks pulsed faintly under the fluorescent light. His palms were dusty, tiny flecks of powder still clinging to the skin from the hotel floors. He photographed the marks, noting the timestamp and location. Even now, the evidence existed, visible, tangible, undeniable. In town, he sought a doctor. Examination revealed no puncture wounds, no torn skin, no explanation for the bruising or the pressure marks. The physician, concerned but puzzled, suggested minor contusions from sleeping awkwardly or stress-related swelling. Michael knew better. Stress and awkward sleep did not leave such patterned, precise bruises on the eyelid and forearm, nor explain the disorientation and temporal anomalies he had experienced. Authorities were next. He tried to report the hotel's location, describing the structure, its name, and his experience in detail. Investigators found nothing. The land where the hotel had appeared was empty forest, no trace of the building, no remnants, no signage, nothing matching his description. Even satellite images showed continuous tree cover where he remembered the clearing in the hotel parking lot. His evidence, photos of the bruises, notes, timestamps, proved his presence somewhere, but not the hotel itself. Back home, Michael returned to routine, yet nothing felt entirely normal. Shadows in his apartment seemed longer, corners subtly altered. Electronics flickered unpredictably. His alarm clock occasionally skipped minutes, and faint metallic scents occasionally hung in rooms he had cleaned thoroughly. His wife noticed changes, pauses in conversation, distracted murmurs of numbers and times, slight hesitations before responding. Michael downplayed everything, attributing it to fatigue from the hike and the long drive. Over time, the bruises faded, though never completely. Faint patterns remained under his skin, reminders of what had happened. Michael never returned to the Hawthorne Hotel, nor did he try to locate it. He had been outside physically, but the influence remained. Occasionally, at night, he would feel a subtle pressure behind his eye, a faint itch along his forearm, or catch a metallic scent in a room that had been cleaned for weeks. He documented everything meticulously, storing photographs, notes, and recordings away from sight. Occasionally, he would review them late at night, headphones on, reliving the experience with calm observation. Each review confirmed the same facts. The hotel had observed, interacted, and left tangible evidence on him. It had influenced time, space, and perception. Local legends began to echo his experience. Whispers in nearby towns told of a hotel that appeared in the woods, visible only to some, impossible to locate afterward, and leaving those who entered forever changed. Michael's name was not publicly associated, but in private circles, his story circulated quietly, corroborating the phenomena. People described missing time, altered hallways, shadows that moved independently, and marks on the skin, details that matched his experience. Though life resumed, the memory never faded. Michael lived cautiously, avoiding unknown buildings, dense forests, and long, empty roads. Even years later, when driving past the forest where he had parked for the night, he noticed fleeting glimpses in the corner of his eye, windows glinting, shadows shifting, or a hint of a structure that might not exist. He never approached, but the memory remained vivid, insistent, and deeply personal. The Hawthorne Hotel, wherever or whenever it existed, had released him. Not defeated, not angry, merely patient and observant. Its presence persisted in the world, subtle but undeniable, in the shadows, the bruises, the altered perceptions, and the moments that refused to make sense. Michael had escaped physically, but he would never escape completely. The marks remained, the memories lingered, and the hotel's quiet influence continued, a story untold to the wider world, but vividly alive in one man's mind forever.